They model what they expect of others. That is the absolute number one key behavior.
You can run a business, but without the people, a company is very much not a company.
There are no shortcuts to solutions with people.
Inputs will lead to output.
And if you have that strong purpose and you don't waver from that, inevitably your profits will be higher.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a company that works with professional services firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Adrienne Reynolds. Adrienne is the Chief Learning Officer for Productive Dentist Academy and a dynamic leader in organizational development with a Ph.D. in organization and management. She develops innovative tools like the Dental TQ platform to help dental leaders build thriving teams. With over a decade of experience in HR functions, planning, employee relations, learning and development, and performance management, Adrienne has supported teams of 300 to 3,000 employees worldwide. She's an award-winning HR leader and published researcher. Adrienne specializes in aligning leadership strategies with team strengths, creating harmony, and delivering actionable insights for transformative success. Adrienne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Saeed. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. It's one of my favorite topics in talking about the people side of running a business, because as everyone knows, you can run a business, but without the people, a company is very much not a company, right? And so the best place I like to start off with is, with all of our guests, is really understanding your journey to where you are at the moment. So could you walk us through your journey to the role you have in the organization and what drew you to the dental industry specifically?
Absolutely. So it's rather serendipitous. The CEO and I go way back about 30-something years, but we had lost contact for years. And then we reconnected on social media, and she invited me to be a guest on her podcast, talking about leadership issues. And then at that point, she was having some leadership challenges within her organization, and she asked me to join as a consultant to help her work through some of those and to do some organizational design issues. And so I consulted for the company for about 2 years, and the more I learned about it, the more enamored I became with the organization and the people, especially the people. And so when the strategic shift happened a couple of years ago in the organization, they realized they really needed me more than just on a fractional basis and asked if I would join full time. And I was actually delighted to do that, because I learned that in the dental space, in the dental industry, when we go to the dentist, and whether it's for, restorative work or we're seeing our hygienist or whatever, we're seeing top-notch clinicians, and they're really, really good at what they do. But dentists on the whole, at least in the US, when they go to dental school, very few get any training whatsoever, or just minimal training in how to run a business. How to be a leader of teams. Instead, their education focuses, understandably so, on the clinical side. So what the organization I work for does, Productive Dentist Academy, is to help dentists become first-class business owners and business leaders as well as clinicians. And then from that, as I have gotten deeper into my work in the dental industry, I realized that it's not just the dentist, but very often it's everybody on the dental team, including the office manager, the treatment coordinator, the insurance biller. A lot of folks in this industry get into these roles through who they know, through familial connections. Not that there's anything wrong with that, there isn't. But as a result, very few have gotten formal training in leadership, management, how to, do different aspects of HR, not only from a compliance standpoint, but from a humane and human standpoint. And so that's why I'm so in love with the dental space, because I always tell everybody that I can't retire until there are no more bad managers out there. So obviously I'm never going to retire, at least hopefully I'm making some impact in the dental industry to eliminate those not so good managers and help everybody raise their leadership skills.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think that point actually it permeates through different sectors as well, from what I've seen, in the sense that a lot of, especially in consulting or professional services, there's a lot of people that are technically proficient, right? So just like how you mentioned, they're excellent clinicians in training, but very minimal understanding of how to be a leader, or what are the actual skills of actually driving a team and running a business, and what are the different elements that need to be working together well to be able to do that. So I think it's really interesting you've mentioned that, and the reasons behind your role. What are the most significant talent management challenges you see dental practices struggling with today? And I'm sure there's lots, but
Certainly, recruitment is a huge issue because the necessity of dental or employees in a dental office is they have to be present. They have to be physically present. It's very difficult and very minimal work that can be done remotely. But after the pandemic, there was such a shift to people preferring remote work. It saves them commuting time and money and clothing, and all those things. And so with the combination of so many jobs now available in a remote platform, plus there has been a bump in wages for the past couple of years right after the pandemic, although that is slowing down now as well. When you think about, say, for example, a dental hygienist, it is not just, it's not a desk job. They are sitting there and using their whole body to get into a mouth and dealing with, teeth and gunk. And I can't even imagine doing it. And they're doing that 8 hours a day, and they're having to put up with patients that maybe are, a bit not nice, say, to be kind about it. And it's a tough job being a dental assistant, being a dental hygienist. And so there is quite a struggle now around recruitment to find, we're having shortages, at least in the US, because people are like, well, if I can make the same doing remote work and just sitting at my comfortable desk at home with my dog by my side, or else I'm going to come in and get yelled at by patients with bad oral hygiene, it's a no-brainer, right?
yeah, sure.
Recruitment, I would say, is one of our biggest challenges. And the way that we help dentists to overcome that is to help them understand how to think of themselves not just as a clinician and providing services to their patients, but what is their purpose as a leader? What kind of work environment do they create? Is it a place that people want to go to and they're happy when they're there and they feel a sense of purpose, that what gets them out of bed in the morning is aligned with the purpose of that dental practice? So, we talk about employer branding and help them, do all of the things that they need to do in terms of making themselves more attractive on Indeed or LinkedIn and the other job platforms, but also how to build their culture appropriately and to make it a place where every single employee feels they have value and that they're contributing.
Absolutely, and I was just about to say that what you're saying there sounds a lot like culture, right? And everyone talks about building a great culture and how it's more difficult now than ever before to build a great culture, primarily because of what happened with the pandemic and the remote working side of things. Obviously, dental practices specifically have a unique workplace culture in the sense that people have to be there. It's as simple as that. It's very much a practice that requires your attendance in every single day. What elements contribute to positive culture, from your knowledge and your expertise, which attracts and retains top talent, right? And the right type of talent?
It sounds very pedantic, but it really is true that it really starts with shared definitions and perspectives.
Okay.
So, for example, if a dental practice or any organization really says, we pride ourselves on teamwork. Well, that's quite a nebulous word. What does teamwork actually mean? What does it look like? Is it, do you know when to step out of the way? Do you know when to take charge? Do you know when to just go all in? That can be interpreted by, many different people in many different ways. So what I teach dental practices is, as you're defining your mission or your philosophy of why you exist, the next step is you have to be able to define the behaviors that drive that philosophy. And you have to be able to not only define those behaviors, but describe them to show, okay, this is how that behavior, so let's say communication. Again, what does that look like? What does it look like when it's working the way you want it to? And what does it look like when it's not working the way you want it to? And you have to be very explicit and share this with all team members and work on making sure everybody has that same understanding. I hear a lot of folks, before they talk to me, say, yeah, you know what, we were going to hire that person, but she just didn't have the right personality. Or, you know, I just didn't like her attitude. And it's like, well, okay, for one thing, you can never change a person's personality or attitude. Please don't even think you can try to do that. Okay, that is something that is owned by that individual. So we can't expect a certain personality or a certain attitude out of our employees, but what we can expect are certain behaviors. And so even if, you know, if I'm having a bad attitude on a particular day, and we all do, we're human beings, but yet I'm not, my workplace culture, if I'm steaming mad about something, I better go step away from my desk and count to 10, because it's not appropriate behavior in my workplace culture to just let it out on somebody else, right? There's more constructive ways to deal with conflict.
Sure.
Defaulting back to saying, you know, she didn't have the right attitude, or no, his personality is not a good fit here. That is, we try to find shortcuts, right? Which is natural as human beings to find solutions, but people are too complex. There are no shortcuts to solutions with people. So we have to build that framework around behaviors, as we call them in HR, competencies, because they can be measured, they can be described. You can align performance with them. You can test for them and interview for them in the recruitment process. And that really is where strong cultures are built, is a shared understanding of what behaviors are appropriate, acceptable, and necessary.
I think that's really interesting, and I absolutely love everything you said there, especially with the fact that it's almost a data-driven approach that you can take from making it less about the attitude, less about personality, and more so about behaviors that someone exhibits on a day-to-day basis. And it reminds me of the saying, inputs not outputs, right? And inputs will lead to outputs. So if you can measure that they're putting the right inputs in, the outputs should be more consistent, right? And you can have a consistent culture following on from that. So I think it's a really interesting point you mentioned there. What recruitment strategies, and you mentioned before, like recruitment is one of the hardest things you can do specifically. I would say in most organizations as well, but I imagine in dental practices as well. What recruitment strategies have you found most effective specifically for dental practices when trying to attract quality talent in today's competitive market? Because I'm sure you, as you alluded to earlier, people can now select go working remotely versus remote working in a dental practice where they're maybe not treated in the nicest of ways. So are there any specific strategies, any secret sauce that needs to be implemented that someone listening or viewers watching might be able to go, okay, I can go away with that today?
I would say don't forget that just as much as you have to market your business for your customers, you have to market your place of work for your potential employees. So that's the first part, is you have to be known as a place that people are, hey, I want to work there. That sounds like such a great place to work. Everybody that works there has such a great time. And we do see very large employers with that kind of reputation. You have to be a large employer to create that reputation in your community. So that is certainly the first point, is that employer branding aspect. And the second part, where I see the biggest stumbles in recruitment, is reactive recruiting. In other words, oh my gosh, someone has left or someone has just given notice. We weren't expecting it. So that in itself is a problem if you weren't aware. And now we have to get somebody in the door or else it's going to mess everything else up. And so it becomes a race to find a warm body that can just go under the chair, whether they are a good fit or not.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing managers when they do that. It's a very natural response, right? Because we don't want hiccups. We don't want, our business to be, slowed down or to, anything prevent us from meeting our goals. Great pressure. Dentists are under great pressure. I get it. However, that's why the more pre-planning we can do, the fewer chances you're going to end up in, I just got to get somebody in here. It doesn't matter if they can only last 90 days. Actually, it does matter. That's going to be a lot harder on you cost wise and morale wise and everything else. So trying to help educate leaders of why it's important to slow down in the recruitment process and to take more time, but to get it right the first time, rather than just throwing somebody in there and saying, okay, we've got a body in there, and you have their, the chances, like you said, coming back to metrics and being able to understand, we never get 100% assurance because we're dealing with human beings, but we do have evidence-based practices that increase our chances of success. And that's what I try and bring in to dental practices, that, if you're just grabbing somebody off the street, they could work out, sure, and I could buy a lottery ticket tomorrow and retire, but what are the chances? They're about the same.
Yeah, I absolutely, I think that's so interesting, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I love the fact that at the top of your response you said it's just like how you market your business, right? And for me, it strikes me as the way you really need to approach it is like building a pipeline. When you're bringing in business, you build a pipeline of really good candidates to come into the business whenever you need it, however you need it. It might not be straight away, but having that pipeline of recruits coming in or interviews being handled, that type of thing, gives you the best possible chance of not being desperate and taking any, as you said, anyone with a warm body, right? Any warm body into the business. So it's a really interesting point, and I think a lot of people can really take from that. I could definitely learn from that, because I can tell you right now, recruiting internally, we've made a lot of mistakes as well. So when you wait too long for a recruit, then you do really find that sometimes finding the right recruit isn't the priority, it's finding a recruit, right? And yeah. So I think that's really interesting. So in terms of then interviewing candidates and bringing the right people in, what would you say is the best way to do that? Is there a specific process that you think should be implemented? Is there a 3-stage process? Should you be remote? Should it be in person? How do you think? What do you think is the best way?
Absolutely. And to me, it's less critical as to whether it's remote or in person. Again, that constraint may be something you can't avoid, right? Depending on what your organization is. But what is most important is you first have to start out with the job description of the duties that are required, as well as the behavioral competencies that are required. You have to start with that before you even write the job ad, because you've got to know, what is it you need? What does success look like in this position? And here's the thing, I always advise managers, please be aware that if you hire somebody that can do 100% of that job description, they are overqualified, they're going to get bored quickly, and they're probably going to leave within 6 months. So you want to understand, of that job description, what 80 to 85% must they be able to do walking in the door, because it's just non-negotiable. But where can you build in growth? What of that job description can they learn and develop over time? And then that gives them other internal motivators that they can work for. So it all starts with that job description. Then once you have that in place, once you start screening resumes, once you start interviewing candidates, the biggest mistake we do, because again, we're human beings, is we compare candidates to each other. And that does not provide us with the best candidate. Each candidate must be assessed against the job description and the behavioral competencies. So that means that the interview must be structured. We must ask the same technical and behavioral competency questions to every single candidate, so that we are assessing them to the job description. Yes, we'll have specific questions based on their resumes, but again, it's tying back to the job description. So we don't, if they went to the same school as us, we don't go, hey, yeah, go Cougars or whatever. That's totally irrelevant to whether they can do this job or not, right? And so, yes, so the process needs to be very structured. It needs to be planned in advance. And I always recommend doing panel interviews at the same time, rather than like 2 or 3 interviews one-on-one. Rather have 3 people in the interview at the same time, because you're going to get 3 different perspectives, and that way you can discuss them, and even though you're all seeing the same responses from that candidate. And here's an advantage to remote interviewing, is you can record it. So you can always go back and look at it in case you miss something. So I recommend the process, a panel interview. You've got predetermined questions in advance. You write notes, you take, even if you're using like a 1 to 5 scoring system, and then once you have your finalist, you compare those scoring systems. And then if you have time, and I always recommend, hopefully you can have time, do one more level of interviewing for like your top 2 candidates and have them produce some kind of work sample or presentation depending on the role. Now, I do not recommend you, like I tell dentists, don't have them come in and do 4 hours of chair work, and then you're unpaying them, and that's not cool, right? But have a hygienist like walk you through 10 minutes of what she would do in a particular procedure.
Sure.
We are in an age where, unfortunately, it's becoming very easy to make misleading resumes with ChatGPT and AI and all of that. So it's becoming increasingly more important that we are able to make sure that the candidate actually can do the work and has not just created something that looks fantastic on paper and got some prompts for the interview process. So when possible, I always recommend a work sample.
I think that's a really good actionable insight there in terms of actually asking any successful candidate or someone who is a finalist to be able to go, okay, well, you've got this far now. I just want to know that you're competent, right, in what you say you can do, what you say you can do, right? And without a doubt, it's very easy now to be able to dupe someone with a not 100% honest resume, which I guess is the time that we live in now. But I think that's a really interesting point in terms of, and I want to move a little bit towards and sidestep towards a topic that I really love, and it's leadership. Leadership is without a doubt something that I have to take responsibility of within my own organization as I run my organization, and it's definitely an area where I'm sure many people struggle with, and it requires a lot of growth to be able to be a good leader, right? What are the common performance management mistakes? What do you see in dental practices for where leaders are commonly making these types of mistakes, or how can they avoid making specific mistakes when leading?
The first thing is to remember that every employee is a human being first. And not only are they a human being first, they're an adult human being.
Sure.
And there is nothing more irritating, at least, well, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think that this is wider than me, but there's nothing more irritating that, society deems you over the age of 21 that you can pay taxes and vote and have kids and contribute to your society and buy alcohol or serve your country or whatever, and then you get into a work environment and you feel like you're not being trusted, that you can't make a decision, that you have zero autonomy over what you're doing, or that your perspective isn't the right one because you don't have a particular title. And a lot of leaders take that kind of non-trusting micromanagement approach because that's all they've seen, that's how they were brought up, right? Doesn't make it right, but that's all they saw. And two, it's scary to be a leader because ultimately the responsibility lies with you. And that's not just for making the business successful, but making sure these people still get a paycheck and that they can take care of their families. It's a lot of responsibility. And so that makes people nervous. And, I've got to make sure everything is just right. And we tend to trust ourselves more than we trust anybody else. So I always, when I work with leaders and coach leaders, the first thing I do is say, we have got to develop your self-reflective skills, because you need to be able to recognize what in your own past, what in your own perspective of the world, where are your fear points? Where are your trigger points? And how do those then affect how you lead others? We can't start to work on behavioral changes unless we're aware of what is the root cause, right? Now, I'm not trying to be someone's therapist or anything like that. If you have, risen through the ranks in a particular organization and all you saw were micromanaging, untrusting managers because that was the culture, then that's all you know, right? You're very suspect about anything different because you haven't seen it actually work. So having that self-awareness and the understanding first of where those trigger points are goes a long way to being able to say, okay, well, now we can try something different, and let's just do it in just one little area. Let's just do it as a pilot test. Let's try it with one person, and then we can start to melt away that fear that is inherent in every leader. And I get it. Honestly, I don't like leading myself. It's so much responsibility. I like being an independent contributor, even though now, in the C-suite I am a leader, and it puts a lot more pressure on, the person. So I get it. But it doesn't I get it, alleviate, we've got to do the right thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a really interesting point. Responsibility trumps how you feel, right? And your responsibility dictates how you need to be, and so I think that's really interesting. What are the typical behaviors that you see in a good leader? What do good leaders typically demonstrate in terms of their behavior? And I'm saying behavior specifically rather than attitude and so on. So what
They model what they expect of others. That is the absolute number one key behavior. So if they make a mistake, even if they feel embarrassed about it, even if they, are self-flagellating about it or whatever, they have to own up to that to the other employees. Because if they expect their employees to take a chance or to be innovative or to take a risk, they have to show that it's okay if you stumble. It's okay. It's, it kind of goes back to that very old trope that we've heard in businesses for years of walking the talk.
Yeah.
But it really is, I think that is the number one behavior for leaders. And along with that, how do I put this? It is easier to trust somebody who is consistent in their behavior rather than someone who is flipping floppy all the time. So quite honestly, even if you have a bad leader, if they are predictable and consistent, employees can trust that more than someone who blows hot and cold.
Sure. I think that.
Not that I recommend that's a bad leader, but
Sure.
I would say walking the talk and consistency, those are the two absolute key. And then third is humility. Is recognizing that if you are the leader, if you are the CEO, if you are the dentist, chances are that your patient or your customer is spending 80 to 90% of their time with employees that are not you in your organization. So in fact, you may be the one that's steering the ship, and use a lot of metaphors, sorry. You may be the one that is responsible and in charge, but please note that you're actually not the most important person in the organization, and that's really important to remember as well.
I absolutely love that. The humility part. There's a book that I read. I think is leave your ego at the door, or something like that. And it's true. It's being able to be humble in the way you approach things, and humility is very much a clear thing. I'm a very big sports fan. I'm a very big football or soccer fan, and I always look at some of the best players and try and understand why they are the best, and are they leaders? Are they not? And you look at players like, I don't know, Cristiano Ronaldo. Everyone knows who Ronaldo is, and you see him at every single club. Everyone looks up to him. They were like, he's the most consistent, and he models what he expects, right? And you know what you're going to get from him, and it strikes me as no wonder he's one of the best, because he's consistent in everything he does, and he only ever he's seen as someone that has high demands, but also seen as someone that holds himself to those demands as well as others, right?
Exactly. Right.
And I think that's a really key point. In terms of then, I want to talk to you about the evolution of the dental industry over the next few years. Obviously, we had the pandemic that changed a lot of things, and we have something that's more topical now in the term AI and technology and that type of stuff. How do you see the dental industry evolving over the next 3 to 5 years, whether that be in talent management or anything in terms of technology or anything like that? Do you see anything coming in where you can go, oh, this might change the way the dental industry operates?
Absolutely. We're starting to see great leaps around technology and AI. Some of our close clients have brought in this amazing robot which can do dental implants.
Wow.
So it's almost like robotic surgery. And so you're seeing that, which at first you think, oh my gosh, I don't want a robot, doing something. But then when you see it happen, you're like, oh, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Wow.
And AI is really upping the game in terms of diagnosis around dental issues, and even starting to find the underlying connections between, say, a dental issue and what might that be signaling. Might it be signaling undiscovered diabetes or some type of cardiovascular risk? And because there's a lot of connective tissue, if you'll excuse the pun, between dental issues and overall health.
Sure.
So AI is coming in very strong to help with that. And so this naturally is certainly changing a lot of what we need to do around talent management. Number one, just because a dental assistant has graduated from their program, that doesn't mean they need to stop learning. They obviously need to keep upskilling and learning the new technology and learning, the new expectations of the patients as well. We have seen big absolute game changers in the dental industry, like with Invisalign and, these braces techniques for straightening teeth. Certainly here in the US, everybody, is like totally insane for the perfect white smile and
In
all
the
that.
UK as well. In the UK as well.
Really? Then that's changed.
People actually travel to Turkey to get full veneers done in the
Oh my
UK
gosh.
because it's such a popular thing over here as well. So yeah,
Oh,
100%.
well, it used to not be. Now, I've always said that my smile is a very UK type smile because it's more natural, but I guess I'm going to have to find another.
Yeah, no, it's changing over here very much. Love it.
Sorry, that's probably our fault as an influencer in Hollywood. So sorry. But that also, shows us how it's so different in terms of what patient care has to be as well. So believe it or not, I did have braces as a kid, and back then it was the big wire ones that go all the way around your teeth, and, it had to happen after all my baby teeth were gone and everything else. But now we're even seeing patients demanding that their children get like Invisalign or some kind of straightening. And yeah, which we won't get into the ethics of that from my perspective, but how do you, if you have someone that comes to your dental practice and wants their 10-year-old who still has baby teeth to get braces, how do you approach that?
Sure.
It's a different type of environment now because that person could potentially just subscribe to some online service to get something rather than having the proper in-person care. So even patient management has changed so dramatically with the advances in technology. I mean, it makes sense. And so then patient management requires changes in behaviors that are needed. So it all kind of comes back to what are we doing with the employees and preparing them for their workday, whether it's to use the technology or to make that patient feel that they are getting the best care and what is appropriate and so forth. So yeah, it's not only that, we're also seeing a lot of consolidation. As more technology comes in, as these demands get higher from patients, obviously that puts more pressure on an independent dental practice. And a lot of private equity firms have moved in and are creating what are called dental service organizations, where they are buying into dental practices, consolidating like the practice management aspects, AR and billing and those types of things, with the idea that after a few years, then they will refinance or they will resell, for another capital purchase and make a multiple on that. So we're also seeing the huge decline of individual dental practices, at least here in the US, and a lot more of these private equity-backed DSOs. So that changes everything as well.
Yeah, 100%. That's really interesting to understand that the market is very much evolving. It's evolving with the times, and more people are having more optionality now. And as you mentioned, they can go online and get something to fix it instead of going into actual patient care. So I think that's really interesting to hear. In terms of then this section of the podcast, we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room. And this is a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests to allow our viewers and listeners to understand how business leaders think and operate within a business. Right. And so the first question I like to ask all of our guests at this stage of the podcast is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader in the business?
Wow. Well, currently, my focus as a leader is like I said, in our particular organization, we have made a conscious shift in strategy, which necessitates a great deal of organizational change. Structurally, a little bit on the culture side, different behaviors that are going to be required, upskilling. So one of my major focal points right now as a leader is managing our change management process, because we don't want any of our employees to feel left behind. We don't want them to feel that this is a change that has a negative impact on them. So I've been working to really create a structured process of how we are going through this change rather than just announcing it and telling everybody, get on board or leave. That doesn't work very well.
course not, of course.
So focusing on managing change is huge. And even if we were not making such a strategic shift in our company, just what we've been talking about, our industry is changing so much, helping people, certainly in our organization, and then those that we consult with, helping them to be more adaptable and more resilient and able to let change work for them rather than against them.
Sure, sure. Makes a lot of sense. It's always, I love hearing how the different roles require different remits within an organization as a leader. So it's always interesting to hear. In terms of then, obviously, as a chief learning officer in the organization, what are the metrics that matter most to you? And we talked a little bit about metrics earlier, but what are the things that you look at typically as a leader in the business?
Well, any leader, regardless of their perspective, has to look at the end metrics. So whether that is around market share, whether that is around, profit, revenue, whatever. It's so important, and HR has not always done such a good job of this, of tying what we do and the initiatives that we do to those end game bottom line metrics. So that's really the first place. So what I try to focus on is, any initiative that I bring in, I have to be able to demonstrate to the rest of leadership, okay, this is what the impact this is what I predict the impact would eventually be on our revenue stream or on growing this particular part of our business. If we cannot put those metrics and quantify what we're doing, then it's kind of silly to ask for that investment in the first place, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. There has to be an active and actionable ROI to any investment. Otherwise, it doesn't make any commercial sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of then growth, and this is typically a growth podcast, so we always ask this question in terms of how are you currently growing the business, and is there any specific strategies you're using? Is it going to conferences? Are you using any specific marketing channels? What business development activities are you currently doing to grow the business?
Sure, I'm going to try, because as we are changing our strategy, there are some things I can't speak about yet.
Sure.
But in general, we are very fortunate that we have our own in-house full service marketing agency. And so not only is that for our clients, that's also for us, which is very helpful. So we have very robust marketing capability, both in terms of our online work, a full team of writers, and so we are in the major dental professional magazines almost every month with articles and cover feature stories of our clients, writing case studies. We do also hold 2 educational conferences a year for either existing or new clients coming in. And then we will do regional workshops as well. We have knowledge leaders that will go to other conferences and speak. We, will do at very specific conferences, go in as a vendor and set up a booth, to talk about ourselves as well. But it's really because we don't have a product per se, it's really more about the message of how we can transform that dental practice, whatever the goals of that dental practice is. So we do use a lot of case studies. I mean, we've been doing this for 20 years. So we have a lot of success stories from our clients. And so we leverage that as well in our marketing.
Makes sense. I love hearing the different kind of strategies, and case studies always prove to be a very effective tool as well. And the fact that you've got an in-house marketing agency that serves your clients and yourselves, what a competitive advantage that plays in your favor for sure.
Thank you.
Final question that I like to ask all of our guests at the end of the podcast is, if you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that be?
Business problem. Helping leaders to not become so invested in their profit motive that they forget their purpose motive. Because honestly, and I say that not just because I think it's the humane way to think about things, but the research, and I say, you mentioned that I was a researcher. I've also been a business professor in academia for over 10 years as well, when I'm not in the real world. And the evidence is overwhelming that if you have a purpose for why you do what you do, and a purpose that you can then gather and rally your employees around, that resonates with your customers, because you're never going to reach the entire consumer market, right? You've got to figure out what's your slice. So you've got to connect with them through purpose. And if you have that strong purpose and you don't waver from that, inevitably your profits will be higher. Your market share will be more solid. the evidence shows that without that purpose, if we just focus on profits, that is when organizations start to lose their competitive advantage. It's when they start to get more shaky and, things really start to fall apart. So if I could wave a wand, it would be not to forget your purpose.
Love it. Absolutely brilliant. Adrienne, thank you very much for sharing your time today. It's been a really great conversation and some great insights. For our viewers and listeners out there that are listening or watching, where could they find you if they wanted to know more?
Our website is www.productivedentist.com. That's probably the easiest place to go. And I'm Adrienne@productivedentist.com for my email. Certainly anybody's welcome to reach out. I'd love to speak more with them.
Fantastic. Well, Adrienne, thank you very much for sharing your time today. It's been a really fascinating conversation and really great insight. So thoroughly enjoyed it and I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Amazing. All right then, we'll see you soon. Bye now.